Okay, good morning everybody. Welcome to the second day of the European Quality Assurance Forum 2014. You will notice that I'm neither Austrian nor Oliver Vittori. Unfortunately, Oliver's not been able to make the forum for family reasons, so I will be stepping in. For those of you who weren't here yesterday, my name is Dan Derricott. I am the current chair of the Forum Steering Committee and will be taking us through the session this morning. To those of you who are coming in the room now, please feel free to come right down the front. These are good seats. Poor Philippa here has a whole kind of bench to herself. So this morning we are going to have a panel debate with our fantastic speakers here on the role of quality assurance in the shift from teaching to learning. So yesterday, Philippa very helpfully and eloquently set out the landscape and the context of the shift from teaching to learning. And now it's our panel's job to unpick the implications of that for quality assurance. So we have the perspectives of students, of quality assurance agencies, and of teachers on how our internal quality assurance systems and our accreditation systems might need to change their focus to evaluate the modern day and more personalised student learning experience. Or for instance, we might be looking at how our national and external quality systems could be used to promote the kind of thing we heard about yesterday. And perhaps a question for some of those operating in some of the representative bodies: will the revised European standards and guidelines go far enough in promoting this kind of thing? So we have an excellent panel lined up to help us address these questions. First up, we have Henning Detlev, who's Deputy Managing Director of the Foundation for International Business Administration Accreditation, a Swiss-German quality assurance agency. Prior to this, Henning was responsible for higher education policy at the BDA Confederation of German Employers and represented Business Europe to the Bologna follow-up group. Tijana Isovsky is studying economics at the University of Belgrade in Serbia. Having spent 2 years representing Serbian students to the European Students' Union's board, Tijana is now a member of the executive committee there working on quality assurance, qualifications frameworks and student-centred learning. And Francesc Steve is a teacher and research fellow in the Department of Pedagogy at Rovira i Virgili University in Tarragona here in Spain. He's visiting scholar also at ICLON, Leiden University in the Netherlands, and very helpfully for the context of our debate, researches the digital competences of university students. Now, unlike many panel debates, our speakers don't have opening statements. I have some provocative questions for them to start, and then we're going to throw it out to you. So while they're starting with my questions, could you think about what you heard yesterday? Think about what challenged you most, what made you think, oh, that's not possible, or that's fantastic, and then find a question to ask to our speakers. And we'll have some students from the University of Barcelona floating around with microphones. So, first up to our panel. We heard yesterday that the landscape of teaching and learning is changing rapidly. In a couple of sentences, do you think that the typical quality assurance systems we find in Europe are still fit for purpose in this changing landscape? Tijana, perhaps we could start with you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, they are still fitful, but nevertheless, education is about constant improvement. And so are our quality assurance systems. So there is a lot of room for improvement, and student-centered learning being the approach that is going to influence quality assurance systems and what they're focusing on.
Do you think that student-centered learning features heavily enough at the moment in quality assurance systems?
At the moment, not enough.
Okay. Are there any systems that you think are a good example of where it does happen?
There are some internal quality assurance systems. For example, Czech University of Masaryk, which has good student evaluation system, good transparency, feedback of students, which is greatly represented, and students are very highly satisfied by it.
Okay, but generally there's some room for improvement.
Yes, generally, yes, of course.
Henning, do you agree?
Well, as representative of a quality assurance and quality development agency, I certainly agree that there is always room for improvement. I do think if we talk about fitness for purpose, we have to ask ourselves if the shift from teaching to learning has always been the purpose of external quality assurance. Actually, this shift is a rather recent phenomenon that has only emerged in the last years as a name for the whole educational system. If we look at this room, it was certainly not designed like with a student-centered mindset, as we can see. So it is a recent phenomenon. I still think that the general mechanism of quality assurance is fit for purpose. We have to keep in mind that external quality assurance is first about people writing papers. And in order to reach the purpose, it matters how the follow-up process looks like, what people do with the paper. And the three most important mechanisms that I can note is first, that higher education institutions are willing to implement the recommendations that are made in external quality assurance reports. Second, that there are certain groups within the higher education institution that want to have a change, and then those reports give an additional argument to them and give them, so to say, more power within the institution. And the third is, of course, external partners, ministries, funders, whatsoever, who basically enforce a change according to the recommendations that are made in the reports. I think those three mechanisms can also be applied to the shift from teaching to learning if the reports address that specific purpose.
Okay, thank you very much. And Francesca, you are teaching. You are the person on the panel who has to implement some of these things and also deal with quality assurance systems from that perspective. So are the systems fit for purpose for you to be able to implement this shift to learning from teaching?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here. For me, it's a pleasure. Since the last decades, we are trying to change how to understand the teaching from a traditional education, teacher-centered learning, how we view just today, to new approaches. It focuses on each student interest, abilities, and learning styles. This change is not new. There are a lot of different pedagogic movements. And in order to your question, different declaration, European guidelines, national regulation, and external evaluation and accreditation process have been contributed decisively for this purpose. In my case, I have been involved as an external evaluator in the process of verification of new degrees adapted to Bologna. And I have seen firsthand this process in my country. And all the curricula, our bachelor's and master's degrees, are currently focused on competence. Universities have had to rethink and reorganize their curricula to explain the teachers' methods, student evaluation process. And this process, with their strengths and weaknesses, has been done. However, according to my experience and according to different authors, strategies based on external and generic regulations don't establish a real change. In fact, in many cases, It has only been a legal change, in my opinion, a bureaucratic change that has simply seems the inversion of many resources of our universities, teacher perceptions like wasting time, and students' disappointment. Many of the suggested changes with the Bologna process are theoretically implemented by universities. In many cases, they have been remained only on paper. We can discuss more about that, but I think it depends. External contributes in this process, but it depends of the project of the university and the involvement of the participation of their stakeholders, external and internal actors. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's clearly some room for development in the systems from different perspectives. So in your opinion, what are the indicators of quality that a quality assurance system should be looking for in an evolving context for teaching and learning? So based on what we heard yesterday, what should our quality assurance systems actually be looking for, monitoring and evaluating? Henning, perhaps we could start with you this time.
I mean, this should be a debate. We already talked about our points of view before, Tiana as student representative and me. I would like to make a statement that focuses more on the problems now that the university and institutions of higher education face, and that make it difficult to apply indicators for learning, and would rather speak for still indicators of teaching. And that is the following experience that we make. We have institutions that would really like to make the shift from teaching to learning. And they ask themselves, okay, we should have a look at what the students really want. How do they really learn? And how can we adapt our systems to that? And then they look at the students that they have, and they have hundreds of them. Even in one study program, they have hundreds of them. And these hundreds of students have hundreds of different learning styles. For the university, it's extremely difficult now to make a decision based on the learning preferences of students. There is no voice of the students. Yesterday, this expression was used, the voice of the students, but it's not the voice. It is hundreds of voices in one class, and very often contradictory. When we go to an institution and they show us their efforts to adapt the study programs to the needs of the students, they very often have results like this. 40% are satisfied as it is, 30% want a little more, 30% want a little less. And then they say, what shall we do with it? We cannot interpret that. And what they do is, those who want to have a study program that is good for the students, what they do is they look at, okay, what do we think is good teaching? And they make the assumption that good teaching helps the students in all their variety and their diversity most. And this is, I think, this makes the shift from teaching to learning very difficult. And this is the reason why most indicators that are used are still in the realm of good teaching.
Okay, thank you. Tiana, you've been doing some work around student-centered learning and quality assurance systems. So to pick up on my original question, what kind of indicators should we be looking for a good quality student learning experience? And just to come back to Henning's point, is there a student voice?
Thank you. So yes, students should be involved in the whole process, and our strong belief is that students should be fully involved in defining quality assurance policy of institution and internal system, evaluation of teaching activities, and that student feedback should be a mix of several instruments, and that goes back to the Henning's comments. When we talk about student-centered learning, it's a complete difference, it's a complete mindset change, and we should not think inside of the boxes that we already have. So student voice is clear, And comparing to what my colleague just said, is we should not look at the students, but rather invite them to engage and ask them directly. So it's not how to interpret all the voices, but ask the right questions. Because lately we have been in the student feedback having a problem of students not answering enough, not having motivation to participate. And the answer from the student is, you're not asking us real questions. You're asking us assuming what you know, trying to get the answer that you would like. And that is the thing, involve students in the whole process, every step of the way, as we spoke yesterday, as equal partners. And that would solve some of the problems. That is what student-centered learning is about.
Okay, so I'm not sure we've answered the question about what system, quality assurance system, should be looking for, so I'm going to throw it over to you. Could you spend a couple of minutes talking to the person next to you on what you think the indicators should be in a quality assurance system that embraces a greater focus on learning rather than teaching? Go. Good stuff. We're starting.
Yep.
I've got some questions on student involvement specifically, so I just want to kind of keep it on
Okay.
teaching and learning more broadly.
Okay, Henning provoke.
I think we have a risk that the whole conference could focus just on student engagement and partnership, which is important, but it's about more than that. But I have some questions that will no doubt get you.
We should probably tweet about this.
No.
Nope, I'm fine. Yeah, it's all good.
If we just pause there for a moment, and we will take some of your thoughts on the indicators that we should be using in quality assurance systems going forward. Okay, so we have some people at the back ready with microphones. Does anybody want to feed back their thoughts on the debates we've had so far? So there's one here. If you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Jarosław Płóciennik, University of LODZ, Poland. I'm Vice Rector for Curricula and Quality Assurance. And I think we discussed with my colleague from Polytechnic University from Łódź as well. And in my view, the problem is that we have long-term indicators, and the best long-term indicator is success in job in the future. But this is not very operational indicator nowadays. So I think the best indicator is how many students are engaged in learning process and in many quality assurance systems in the universities. But the problem lies, I think, in students as well, because students should be engaged really in their career planning. And this is one of the main problems, I think, that students are very often not interested in giving feedback. So that's my 3 thoughts.
Great, thank you. So if you can keep thinking if you want to contribute, I'm just going to throw that point to Tiana. Is the problem that students don't want to engage?
Okay, can I first reflect on the purpose and the long-term goal? We strongly believe it's not just employability. There are multiple purposes of higher education. But yes, students are engaged, and students want to voice their opinion. It depends only of how much freedom they have to influence the system, and that is what is shaping their answers and their forms. So if we give them enough freedom to change something and then actually to see the change happening, they would engage even more and more. And yes, students want to give you feedback. You just have to ask the right questions.
Okay, so you have to ask the right questions. That's the key to making everything work. Do we have some more thoughts from the audience? Okay, who's brave enough? That looks like a kind of a hand. No, okay.
But could I give a critical remark on that, actually?
Yep.
We find the interviews with students when we do an on-site visit at an institution very interesting. And we usually have very engaged students that we talk with. However, if there are many students, we should, if we really take the shift from teaching to learning serious, we should engage many more students. I mean, this is what you just said. And then we get a problem of both motivation of students to take part in that, even conflicting interests. I mean, is it in the interest of a student to say that the exam was not difficult enough, that not all the learning outcomes were actually part of the exam? And we also have a problem because not all students are able to engage in that discussion. It is not that easy to take part in it. I mean, for students to reflect how to put certain learning outcomes into a didactic setting and how to find good ways of assessment, that is not common sense.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about student feedback in the last few minutes, but what are the other indicators of quality in a different kind of landscape for teaching and learning? Are there any final thoughts on this topic from the audience before we move on? Okay, yes, there's a hand at the back there. The microphone's coming to you. If you can introduce yourself, please.
Good morning. My name is Jim Walsh. I'm Vice President for Strategy and Quality at Maynooth University in Ireland. Just a couple of comments first. I think there's a risk here of creating a dichotomy between teaching and learning. I tend to think of the student experience, which is an outcome of both teaching and learning, some of it proactive and some of it passive. Some of the experience of students does not come directly from what they gain from their lecturers. It comes from their interaction with other students and how the university creates an environment for that interaction to happen. I think we need to keep in mind the wider purposes of higher education here. Employability is certainly important, but there is a wider educational experience that we're trying to inculcate to enable our students to become good citizens in the best sense of the word for the future. I think one point that hasn't been mentioned here are the constraints on trying to make this paradigm shift. One of the, I think, most severe constraints are the structures of the programs that we have inherited. The legacy of programs that are specified as 3 years or 4 years, with each discipline contributing, jealously guarding their time within the program. If we want to change programs, there has to be scope for innovation, and scope means creating time and letting go of other time. So for staff, that is hugely challenging. The willingness to let go or abandon some of what has been taught in order to create space for some new things. And I think that should be an indicator in an external evaluation, the extent to which programs have adapted to the requirements of learning as distinct from the requirements of teaching in the future. There is also, I think, within our assessment of teaching, the focus maybe is too narrow. We are counting on the amount of contact time and the amount of formal time for the teaching exercise. There are a lot of other aspects of teaching which were referred to yesterday evening, which don't fit so conveniently into that framework. But yet, if we want to make the transition, we are asking staff to reconsider how they allocate their time. And I think that's an issue that needs to be considered in the context of quality assurance if we're serious about making a transition. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So a couple of points there around looking at how much a course has changed and adapted to the changing needs of students and wider society. And a really interesting and poignant point around contact time. Is it actually the quantity of time that's most important to evaluate, or the quality of that time? I'm going to throw that to the panel.
I didn't.
So the question, kind of the final point there, measuring the quantity of contact time, teaching time, is often held up as an indicator of quality. But is that good enough, or is it actually the quality of the time that's important? Tiana?
Okay, I can start. First of all, let me just mention that this room is not really student-centered, and we were just discussing that because it's really hard for us from here to hear your questions. It is definitely more about quality. And we spoke about yesterday the MOOCs. And yes, so MOOCs have better student satisfaction because of the quality of the contact. So it's not just, yes, students are looking for more contact with teachers, but it is more about the quality of the interaction.
Okay, great. So I'm going to throw this back out to you and ask you to vote afterwards. Is the amount of contact time, the amount of time spent teaching a student, a useful indicator of quality or not? So if you just discuss that amongst yourselves, and then we'll take your opinion after. So is contact time, the number of hours spent teaching, a useful indicator of quality?
hear anything.
It's impossible to understand.
Yeah. Even when you turn, it's hard to understand you. Yeah.
And speak here.
This was the design, the audience can hear the speaker, the speaker cannot
Yeah.
hear the audience.
At all. I feel so small in this room. It's hard for all of us to understand.
No, yeah.
It's really a bad room.
Okay, if we stop there, I'm going to ask you two questions. So 2 questions, and if you could kind of put your hand up and vote on both. First of all, can you put your hand up if you think that measuring contact hours, the number of hours taught, is a useful indicator of quality? So hands up if you think yes. And hands up if you think no. And hands up if you don't really have an opinion. Okay. So I think more people said no. The second question, put your hands up if in your country this is a measure that is used in one way or another. So, okay. So I think there were more hands up there saying it's used than there were saying it's a useful indicator of quality. So that's an interesting thing for us to think about as we think about the changing approach to teaching and to learning and the shift from one to another. Did anybody want to feedback any comments at that point? I will come back to you in a minute, but you've spoken, so I'm going to take the 2 ladies here, the one behind first, yeah. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, my name is Roisin Smith. I'm from Trinity College in Dublin. And I suppose the student representative on the panel made a very good point, and my colleague Jim Walsh, also from Maynooth. You know, in terms of this contact time, you think about the push in universities to have fixed timetables, and how when you take a look at timetables and how much space, you know, using up space, using up, lecture halls, etc., and what's not there is the time for student-led learning. You know, you take a look at gaps in timetables, you think, oh, there's a deficiency there, we should be using that time. But actually, what you're doing is you're actually allocating time for student-centred learning, for gathering in student spaces for different kinds of learning, student-to-student learning. So that was just a reflection on what I heard.
Great, and then just in front there as well.
Hello, Karen Hedvall. I'm from Sweden, Quality Assurance Coordinator there. And I noticed something quite interesting that me and several of my colleagues from Sweden, we thought that it is a useful indicator, but it's not being used in Sweden. So I think that probably it is one of very many useful indicators, contact time, because there has to be a threshold. But it also is not just a teacher meeting a group of students face-to-face. Apart from being a quality assurance officer, I'm also a teacher, and I'm working almost exclusively with distance education, flexible education. I never meet my students face-to-face, apart from sometimes through video link. But I do think contact is very important with them in other ways. Contact time as in being available for students' questions, as in having a quite fast response when they need something, as in coordinating that the students have contacts with their peers. I'm still there as a teacher, and I think we should just find more subtle ways of measuring what really is contact. Also to know about the quality, not just not have it at all.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. We have a question. Actually, if you just stay there, we'll take the gentleman again to come back to the point, and then yourself in a moment.
Thank you very much. I totally agree with a colleague from Sweden that we should define contact more precisely, because there is... I didn't vote because I think the alternative is false, because it depends. It depends how do you define contact, if it's contact time during lectures or if it's contact time during laboratory work. This is crucial, I think, because if we think about the humanities, contact time during lectures and seminars is different from the science or scientific disciplines in which laboratories are quite frequent, like physics, chemistry, and so on. So we should think about it more precisely. I think we shouldn't think about the universities as such. Thank you.
Okay, great. And then just a final contribution here.
Rolf Tarak, Luxembourg. Well, I think you should have asked the question differently. Okay. You should have said, if the quality of the contact is good, do you want to double the time? And you would have gotten a unanimous answer. If the quality of the contact is lousy, do you want to double the time? Then, of course, nobody wants to double the time. Huh? So, therefore, what I would suggest is leave the students how much contact they want to have, because they will select the good contacts and they will get rid of the bad ones.
Okay, so we put students in charge. There's a hand up at the back, in the back corner there. We'll take that contribution. And then we'll take one down at the front as well. If you could introduce yourself, please.
I'm Roland Sidwell with the Ministry of Higher Education in Abu Dhabi. I have a two-part question. How do you do formative assessment of student learning? And related to that, what do you think, do any of you use external experts in learning?
Sorry, could you just... Sorry,
visits?
we can't really hear you that well, or certainly I can't. Can you just hold the microphone a little closer, please?
I don't know if you heard the first part of the question.
No.
How do you do formative assessment of student learning in outputs rather than inputs? And the second part is, have any of you thought, do you use external experts in learning, understanding learning, to make classroom visits while learning is going on to assess the quality?
Okay, so I certainly got the second part, which was around classroom observations using experts in pedagogy and learning. And Tiana, do you want to pick up that and the first bit there?
So if I heard correctly, the first question was about assessment of student learning. And I would say through the learning outcomes and their evaluation, because in students' opinion, teachers are responsible for defining those learning outcomes that are intended. And it is up to students and both teachers to evaluate in the end of the learning process if those attended learning outcomes have been achieved. So that should somehow shape the assessment. That should be assessment of the learning experience. Yeah.
Okay, and then Francesca, perhaps you could comment on the second part around whether we should be using experts in pedagogy to observe teaching and learning and to provide feedback on that as part of the quality assurance system.
Yeah, of course. It's very interesting this question. Let me explain or try to define my opinion about the concept of learning, because although the concept of learning is very usual and common, I think it's a difficult term to define due to its complexity. For me, the process of learning is influenced by a series of conditions, the kind of or the type of learning, skills, content, knowledge, the specific internal and external conditions and barriers, for example, motivation, expectatives, their prior knowledge, and the interaction dimension. It provides the impulse for learning, and traditionally the teaching has been understood as this process of transmission, a linear process focused on the teacher, and we are not vessels to be filled, and the student-centered learning, for me, it's not only a cognitive process. It's influenced by many factors, and for me, teaching is a process of guiding this relation and interaction process between the teacher and the students with the faculty, in order to facilitate this process of construction. And of course, we can design an educational model for the university with all of the actors, with external and internal actors, and we have to define concrete measures and example of our universities focus in this kind of new perspective of learning.
Okay. Great, thank you. And Henning?
I would like to point to one very basic problem that we still have when we apply this kind of concept. We have intended learning outcomes in the beginning. And then we have, in the best case, an assessment that is based on the intended learning outcomes to really see if they were reached in the end. And in between is a black box called learning process. And we make the assumption that if the learning outcomes were reached in the end, that the students passed through a successful learning process, and we usually have the assumption that this is due to the offer of the institution. I give you one example. If we have a study program and the study program contains the module scientific methods, and we find out that the students know the scientific methods and they are even satisfied with the course in general, we think that it's due to that module that the student knows scientific methods, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Students might get it from fellow students, from their parents, from their own reading, from other modules whatsoever. So if we really take the shift from teaching to learning serious, we leave that assumption aside, and then quality assurance would mean that we first reconstruct the learning process. We ask students how they really learn, where they get the knowledge from and the competences. And that would mean that we would need a totally different way, of course. And then we would need to enable the student to enter into such a deep reflection of how they actually learn.
Okay. Tiana, do you agree that there's a problem where we look just at the intended learning outcomes and the assessment at the end and not so much at the part in the middle?
So I completely disagree with the first initial statement, but yes, we agree on something. The black box in between is not actually a black box. It's a learning experience, and we should enable students to have flexible learning paths and choose their way and help teachers' role should be re-questioned, and they should, as my colleague said, be actually the provide guidance and steering through the learning process. So if we do so, I'm sure that most of those learning outcomes will be achieved in the end, and it won't be a black box. It would be a range of possibilities for students to, in the end, acquire those.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So Fernando first, and then we have a question and comment over here.
Fernando Galán from the European Students' Union. I have actually two very brief questions connecting to the discussion right now. We are talking about the student-centered learning and how to assist the student in order to achieve the learning outcomes. What about the teachers? I mean, we are saying that the students have very different ways of learning, but the teachers have also very different ways of teaching. Not all are good on ICT, not all of them are good also on lecturing, so should we also focus on that a bit? And my second question is, we are talking now how QA should adapt to these new changes. So should we keep our usual way of doing business, like doing the internal check once a year, or should we allow to have more flexible internal systems that are able to detect the problem and act upon them on the spot instead of waiting 1 year and maybe losing one generation of students?
Okay, so two questions there. First, around how we support people, staff to teach, academic staff, and how we support them to adapt to this changing environment. Very much chimes with what Philippa was saying yesterday around staff transitions. And then secondly, are our systems responsive enough? Is checking once per year good enough? Who wants to start on that one? Francesca, could you?
Thank you. In my opinion, we must design an educational model shared by all of the institutions. Individual innovate experience are fine, but it's necessary university projects that contribute to generalize, and the university management should drive it, moderate, but they cannot impose it. An educational model have to, in my opinion, to establish the institutional objectives, mission and vision, but it's not only a section of the website, it's a shared project that identifies the institution. And it's not only big words, it should be lines of actions, concrete measures, an example of good practice, and what should contain quickly. In my opinion, this educational model of the university first of all, a clear commitment to active learning, to teaching methods that promote student participation, the creation of knowledge by students, like the keynote from yesterday, a closer contact between the university, its teaching, and their future professional context. And this kind of strategies like ECT methods, cooperative learning, service learning, new virtual environments. It's very fine, and it has to be part of this educational model, but these activities cannot be just individual actions done by a few crazy people, but rather be part of the educational model of the university. And in this model, we can establish the process, the methods and the assessment process, but it has to be part of the university and designed for the institution, not only from an external part. It's my...
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to throw it back to a very quick kind of put your hands up vote. So taking Fernando's first question around how well we support staff to be able to teach, so professors and academic staff to teach using more modern methods. Can you put your hands up if the quality systems, so particularly the external quality systems, are checking for this kind of thing, whether higher education institutions are actually supporting staff to develop their teaching methods and their knowledge of different pedagogies. So put your hands up if in your systems that is checked for. And hands up if it's not. So there's a real mix there, which I think is interesting. So Tiana, you've been looking at student-centered learning in quality assurance systems, and have you found anything through ESU's work that shows whether this kind of thing is actually embedded into quality systems, whether support for staff to teach in new ways is happening?
Yeah, we call for that. We would like to see a better staff support. It is happening somewhere, and there are good case practices, but not enough. So the QA should be focused a lot on teacher support as well, and staff trainings, and yeah.
Okay. Henning?
I don't take a look now at the few very, very good institutions that really make it their general policy to always train their staff continuously and everything, and staff that is committed to this. We usually find staff training under 3 headlines. The first one is if lectures are so bad that action has to be taken. And I mean, that would be part of the quality assurance system somehow, but only for the worst cases. Second, for the young teachers who don't know yet how to do it, so they are really trained. And third, as a voluntary action for those who are already good in it, so to say, and just want to be better but are really committed by themselves. Otherwise, it is rather left to few cases, I would say.
It's interesting that our quality assurance systems, where they do focus on staff professional development and pedagogic training, do focus on younger staff who are perhaps new to it, which is good. I wonder if students say that the problem is with younger staff or with staff who have been there for a very long time. Tiana, is there an opinion of European students?
Younger staff is not usually the problem.
Okay.
It's the resistance to change, which is a human thing, but yes, we usually have a problem with.
Okay, and then the second question before we go to the point over here. Are our systems responsive enough, and do they allow for problems to be picked up or for improvements to be made? So currently systems often look at maybe a program of study once per year, and maybe not in between. Is that good enough? Yeah, an external evaluation takes place every 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Should we have a more responsive system?
Ask the institutions.
No. I think it's not enough. It's in my opinion, but I'm not like institution point of view. I am a PhD student. I'm trying to improve my career like a young teacher, but I think it's not enough. The systems, the strategies of quality systems have to guide this process, but the institutions have to do their work, because a lot of institutions don't improve or don't believe in this education model, in this culture, and for these institutions and for all the people of these institutions is like only a bureaucratic change, because they don't believe in this culture change.
Okay.
I mean, coming back what I said in the beginning, an external quality assurance report gives a good argument to those who want to have a change in the direction that is recommended in the reports. And this is the experience that we make. Those who are in favor of change, they say to us, it's always nice when you come, because then something changes our institution right before and right after the visit, so to say. Yeah? But I think we should not put too much burden, of constant quality checks on the institution either from the external perspective. I think once every few years is usually enough for a thorough accreditation.
Okay, an interesting analogy from the UK. We reviewed the external quality assurance methodology a couple of years ago, And the feedback from students was that once every 6 years when QAA review a university is when the students have the most influence and can make the most change in the university. So they would like reviews or evaluations more often so that they would have more influence. Perhaps it's problematic that students only think they have so much influence around the time of a quality evaluation, and it's not a permanent culture of partnership, as we heard yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So 1 year is not, it's not good enough. It's not, so if we really think of students as partners in this process, we should consult them every step of the way, as I already said, and consult them all the time and reflect. And external evaluation, yes, could be once a year,
okay.
But
super. There was a question over here somewhere. Yep. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Jari Rantamäki from Jyväskylä, Finland, and I'm working as a senior advisor in quality assurance, and also I'm working in the university pedagogy. And I have found and thought that quality assurance, the effect of that towards the teaching to learning effect is dependent on the learning philosophy of any party involved in the decision making, including us as working on quality assurance as the teachers and the administration of the university and students as well. It is not said that students are the best informed in the sense of learning philosophy, for example. They have experience of learning, but not perhaps on that level of philosophy, how to think about learning and how it's most effective for them, because they are just learning that. And then we were discussing about the indicators. And I have played a bit with an idea that in the university education they are meeting two research projects. The one is the student's project. He or she is like making research on the topic what she's trying to learn. And another one is teacher's project, and his project is to study and make a research on the learning process of the students. So if we are putting indicators on those processes, then we may have some path towards to help the quality assurance to give some good feedback and such for the process to reach the outcomes as supposed.
Great, thank you very much. That's very helpful. I wonder, we've not got that long left, so if we take a couple... Oh, okay. There are a couple more contributions from the few that are hands up. Somebody has a microphone. Achim, hello.
Achim Hopper from the Austrian Quality Assurance Agency, ACO Austria. I would like to join Henning in his request to focus more on the learning process. I think that we have been discussing too many questions of second order today. It is not a question of the cycle of quality assurance. It's not the question of in engaging students in curriculum design, of asking the right or wrong questions. I think if we talk about student-centered learning, we need to focus much more on what is happening in the classroom, and this is a big challenge for internal quality assurance and for external quality assurance. This brings me back to our colleague from Abu Dhabi. His question wasn't really taken up. Should we have visits to classrooms? There are presumably a couple of countries in Europe where something like that would be a scandal. In other parts of the world, that's daily work of quality assurance agencies. I think it is true. The learning process, to a large extent, is, in terms of quality assurance, a black box. It's not about contact hours, which we should discuss, but how should a learning process look like? That it in order to help the students achieve the learning outcomes. Of second order is the question: how many contact hours do we need for this type of a learning process? And these are the questions. We need to talk much more about pedagogy, which is not really in the focus of quality assurance. So let's talk about this black box. Let's talk about how to tackle the questions about pedagogy, about what is happening in the classroom. Let's talk about appropriate ways for external quality assurance to address the learning process, the quality of the learning process.
Great, thank you very much. We'll just take a response from Henning first.
I would like to make that one study program that we accredited, and that was a correspondence course for people, for managers in executive positions, which means they barely met, but the study material was sent out to them, and the university stressed how good the study material is and so on, and they meet like once or twice per semester. The students said that they mostly learned because they got to know each other in the first 2 sessions, and now they are discussing outside the classroom. They're discussing the problems that they have together. The university didn't know about that kind of informal networks that existed among the students because they didn't use the online tool that was provided by the university. They rather used their own networks. But to know that might be very helpful for the university still to improve the quality of the learning process. But it is more difficult because it's, so to say, outside the control of the institution, and that makes the shift from teaching to learning so difficult.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've got time for one, perhaps two very brief final remarks. Gentleman in the middle here with the bluish white shirt.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tim de Jong. I'm from the Radboud University in the Netherlands. I'm a student there. I have a very practical question because at my university there is a lot of friction between researchers and teaching, because a lot of PhDs have to teach now and researchers want PhDs to do research. And so my question is, we've been talking about contact hours and about the shift from teaching to learning, but do we have the resources to make this shift? Is that possible?
Okay, thank you. And if we take one more as well, just final contribution just over there, yeah.
Hello, my name is Denis Berthiaume. I'm a Vice Rector for Quality Assurance and Quality Enhancement at the University of Applied Arts and Science of Western Switzerland. I've heard a lot of very interesting ideas today, and actually I'd like to throw one more in the pond here, which is that when we talk about shifting from teaching to learning, very quickly we move to student-centered teaching. I would argue that maybe we should not go that far. Maybe we should focus on learning-centered teaching, which is something we find in the literature, and it goes back to the notion of partnership that Philip I was talking about yesterday. And what that means is that students are not the only people we can ask to focus on learning. I mean, if, as a quality assurance reviewer, I ask people, what do they do to ensure that learning happens in their classroom? What do program directors do to actually make the link between what Henning was talking about, the black box, what we declare as learning outcomes, and what people are actually able to do at the end? And if we talk about moving from teaching to learning-centered teaching, then we're able to bring a lot of people on board and get them to think about learning in everything they do. And I would argue that we want to bring the students on board as well. Not only the students, though, but we bring the students on board, and we bring them on board much earlier on in the process, when we design curriculum, when we design processes for quality assurance as well.
Great, thank you. Tiana, would you like the final word? In response? Anybody want to respond to any of those points? Just a general response to any kind of final remarks that you'd like to make very quickly? No? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Well, if higher education institutions put it, and this goes to the question we had about if you have enough resources, if higher education institutions put this in student-centered learning in their mission and vision and make it clear and transparent, I'm sure we could find a way.
Yeah, quickly. If you want to.
Francesca.
Just one sentence, and it's not necessarily more expensive.
Yeah, but certainly it depends on the resources available to the European crisis, and in our context, the Spanish crisis and the policy adopted decreasing funding for education have not been contribute to that change. It's my opinion. And certainly we have to open the windows of the classrooms and we have to open the windows of the institution. But it's not only, it's very important, but it's not only what happened inside the classroom. We have to establish different measures of all the institutions. For example, a strategic program for the incorporation of the student, because it's a crucial moment when they come from the secondary education, and you have to improve their engagement and their participation since these stages, and you have to rethink all the model of the university, focus on the student, not only in teaching and didactics. It's my...
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to wrap it up there. We've heard lots of opinions that I think have helped follow on from yesterday's keynote very well. We've talked about what might be the different indicators of quality going forward, but also then the question that Akim posed at the end that I think we should all take away. How can our quality assurance systems focus more on what we've called the black box? What happens between the intended learning outcomes and assessment? What's happening in the classroom or in the other kinds of learning environments that we have in 2014? So you have some questions and hopefully some different thoughts to go away with. And I think it helps at this point to leave with questions, because you're about to go into workshops and presentations and parallel plenaries where hopefully we'll see some real life practice of how these questions have been answered. So I'm going to wrap it up there, and if I can ask you to join me in saying thank you to our speakers today.